The summer morning of July 13th, 1943, near Biscari, Sicily, a German panzer crew commander named Oberfeldwebel Hans Köhler peers through the narrow driver's vision port of his Tiger I heavy tank, 57 tons of steel confidence rolling through streets, still smoking from the previous night's artillery barrage. His Tiger carries 100 millimeters of frontal armor, nearly 4 inches of hardened Krupp steel, that has shrugged off every Allied anti-tank gun encountered since Tunisia. The 88mm main gun jutting from the turret can destroy enemy Shermans at ranges exceeding a mile. Köhler's crew believes they are invincible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Then something impossible happens. A flash from a doorway 60 yards ahead, followed by a smoke trail no thicker than a man's thumb. The rocket, barely larger than a man's forearm, strikes the Tiger's driver vision port at a shallow angle. The 2.36-inch diameter projectile carries 8 ounces of pentalite explosive wrapped around a mild steel cone. By every calculation, it should bounce harmlessly off the Tiger's armor. Instead, the shaped charge detonates. The cone collapses inward, transforming into a superheated jet of molten metal, moving at 25,000 feet per second. The jet punches through the narrow gap in the vision port, the one vulnerable point in the Tiger's otherwise impregnable frontal armor, and fills the driver's compartment with white-hot copper spray and spalling fragments. The Tiger lurches to a stop, smoke pouring from the vision slot. Köhler and his surviving crew abandon the 57-ton machine that, seconds before, had seemed untouchable. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The American soldiers who fired that rocket carried a weapon their own army barely understood. The Wehrmacht troops, who would later examine the captured bazooka, couldn't comprehend how American infantry ordinary riflemen with no specialized training could destroy the most feared tank in the German arsenal using a tube launcher that weighed less than 13 pounds. This impossibility would trigger a crisis in German armor doctrine and accelerate the most successful reverse engineering program in military history. But the real story isn't about that single Tiger kill in Sicily. It's about the moment when German technical intelligence officers first held a captured M1 bazooka in November 1942 and realized that Americans had solved a problem Germany hadn't even recognized existed. How? To give every infantry squad the capability to kill tanks without waiting for specialized anti-tank units, without complicated aiming systems, without vehicle-mounted guns. The Americans had democratized anti-tank warfare, and they'd done it with a weapon so simple it looked like a practical joke. Late 1941. American ordnance officers faced a reality that kept them awake at night. The United States Army possessed exactly 0 man-portable weapons capable of stopping a German Panzer III from the front. British intelligence reports flooding in from North Africa showed Rommel's tanks shrugging off every anti-tank rifle round the Allies possessed. The standard 55 caliber Boys anti-tank rifle, Britain's frontline answer to German armor, could barely dent the 50mm frontal plates on even the lighter Panzer variants. American arsenals looked worse. The Springfield Armory's experimental T3 anti-tank rifle existed only as blueprints, gathering dust in filing cabinets. The 50 caliber Browning machine gun, devastating against infantry and aircraft, produced nothing but sparks against tank armor. American soldiers deploying to fight the Wehrmacht would face panzers armed with rifles, grenades, and prayers. The deeper problem lay beyond hardware. American military doctrine in 1941 still treated tanks as specialized breakthrough weapons to be countered by other specialized weapons, towed anti-tank guns, tank destroyers, perhaps friendly armor if available. The concept that ordinary infantry might need to kill tanks themselves seemed almost radical. After all, anti-tank guns worked. They were proven. They'd stopped German armor in France in 1940. Except they hadn't. France had fallen in 6 weeks. The German Blitzkrieg doctrine revealed something American planners were slow to accept. battles moved too fast for infantry to wait for specialized anti-tank support. By the time a towed anti-tank gun could be positioned and aimed, the panzers had already overrun the infantry positions. Tank destroyers were mobile, but they couldn't be everywhere. Friendly armor might be engaged elsewhere, or simply not exist in sufficient numbers. What infantry needed was something they could carry themselves. Something that didn't require a vehicle or a three-man crew. Something that could be fired from a concealed position and then abandoned before the tank's machine guns located the shooter. And it needed to actually work, not just damage a tank, but kill it. In May 1942, that weapon didn't exist. Lieutenant Edward Ewell never set out to revolutionize infantry tactics. The 26-year-old Army officer was simply trying to solve a persistent design problem at the Ordnance Department's Research and Development Service. Every rocket launcher prototype crossing his desk suffered from the same flaws: elaborate sights, complicated firing mechanisms, heavy shoulder stocks that made the weapons awkward and difficult to mass-produce. Ewell's superior, Colonel Leslie Skinner, had been wrestling with rocket-propelled anti-tank weapons since 1940. The concept was sound-shaped charge warheads could penetrate armor far beyond their weight class, but delivering them accurately proved problematic. Artillery rockets lacked precision. Hand-thrown grenades forced soldiers to get suicidally close to tanks. Rifle-launched grenades didn't have enough propulsive force. They needed something in between. Something with range, but portable. Powerful, but simple enough for a frightened 19-year-old infantryman to operate under fire. The breakthrough happened on an afternoon in May 1942, and it was almost embarrassingly simple. Ewell was examining a shaped charge grenade prototype in the Aberdeen Proving Ground workshop when Skinner walked in with specifications. They needed a launcher weighing less than 15 pounds, costing under $5 to manufacture, capable of being operated by a soldier with minimal training. Ewell picked up a length of scrap steel tubing from a workbench ordinary. Electrical conduit, about 5 feet long and 2.36 inches in diameter. He held it to his shoulder like a makeshift telescope. The elegance hit him immediately. If the rocket motor fired inside the tube, its exhaust would vent harmlessly behind the shooter. No breech mechanism needed. No recoil absorption system required. Just an open tube. Skinner saw it instantly. Within 72 hours, they'd welded crude iron sights onto the tube, attached a simple wooden shoulder stock, and fabricated a basic electrical firing circuit using a flashlight battery and doorbell wire. The first test firing occurred on May 14, 1942, at the Aberdeen range. Ewell loaded a 3.5-pound rocket into the rear of the tube, essentially a finned pipe bomb with a shaped charge warhead. He aimed at a wooden target frame 60 yards away and pressed the firing trigger. The rocket whooshed forward, trailing white smoke, and detonated on target. The entire weapon had cost $4.83 in materials. Hitting wooden frames meant nothing. They needed penetration data against actual armor plate. The Army trucked in sections of hull from a captured French Saumur tank 45 millimeters of homogeneous steel, similar to what protected German Panzer III's. On May 21st, Ewell fired 3 rockets at the plate from 40 yards. The first punched through cleanly, leaving a hole the size of a baseball. The second penetrated and sent spalling fragments 30 feet behind the target. The third shot went slightly high, but still carved a crater 4 inches deep into the steel. Colonel Skinner reportedly grabbed the tube launcher from Ewell's hands and examined it as if he'd found something magical. A man-portable weapon that could defeat tank armor. No vehicle required. No specialized training needed. Something that could be manufactured by the tens of thousands using basic industrial equipment. The name came during a demonstration for Army brass in June. Major General Gladion Barnes watched Ewell fire the weapon and supposedly remarked that it looked like the musical instrument comedian Bob Burns played on his radio show, a jury-rigged trombone made from gas pipes that Burns called a bazooka. The nickname stuck immediately. By July 1942, the Ordnance Department had designated it the M1 rocket launcher and placed orders for 5,000 units. Production ramped up with astonishing speed. By October, over 30,000 M1 bazookas were rolling off assembly lines. By the end of 1942, American factories had produced nearly 60,000 launchers, but mass production of the launcher was only half the equation. The rockets themselves presented a different challenge. The M6 warhead used conventional explosive mixtures pentalite, a blend of PETN and TNT that barely achieved 3 inches of penetration against vertical armor. Against sloped armor, performance dropped even further. 3 inches might stop a light tank. It would bounce off a Panzer IV. It would be useless against a Tiger. German armor was getting thicker. Intelligence photos from the Eastern Front in late 1942 showed new Panzer IV variants with 80mm frontal plates. Panthers and Tigers were entering production with even heavier protection. American infantry would be facing these monsters with a weapon that, on paper, couldn't hurt them. The solution existed. Shaped charge physics suggested that larger diameter warheads with more explosive would penetrate deeper, but American ordnance doctrine resisted change. The 2.36-inch diameter had been chosen for manufacturing efficiency and weight considerations. Increasing the diameter would require retooling production lines, redesigning the rockets, possibly even creating an entirely new launcher. So in November 1942, when the first M1 bazookas deployed to North Africa during Operation Torch, they carried weapons and ammunition that were, at best, marginally adequate. At worst, they were sending soldiers into combat with anti-tank weapons that might not actually stop tanks. What American planners didn't realize was that German technical intelligence officers were about to get their hands on these weapons. And what the Germans would do with that information would force America to confront the inadequacy of its own design. November 8, 1942. Operation Torch Beaches, North Africa. The first American M1 bazookas arrived in combat with no trained operators. General Dwight Eisenhower discovered the night before the landings that none of his troops had received instruction on the new rocket launcher. The weapons had been rushed to units so recently that soldiers barely knew which end to point at the enemy. This wasn't just a training oversight. It was symptomatic of how hastily the bazooka had been pushed into service. The weapon was revolutionary, but untested in actual combat. The M6 rockets were notoriously unreliable. Battery-powered ignition systems failed in moisture and heat. Rocket motors sometimes burned incompletely, leaving dangerous residue in the launch tube. Some rockets detonated prematurely, others failed to detonate at all. Within days of deployment, German forces captured several intact specimens from inexperienced American units, who abandoned equipment during early encounters with Wehrmacht troops. Some bazookas were captured from Soviet forces who'd received them through Lend-Lease. Others were taken from destroyed American positions in Tunisia after the disastrous Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943. These captured weapons triggered something unprecedented in Wehrmacht technical intelligence. The Germans weren't just examining enemy equipment for vulnerabilities. They were looking at a weapon that represented a fundamental shift in infantry capability. German forces shipped the captured bazookas to Germany for immediate analysis. The weapons arrived at Kummersdorf proving grounds south of Berlin, where Wehrmacht weapons experts conducted the first systematic examination of American rocket launcher technology. What they discovered would fundamentally alter German infantry tactics for the remainder of the war. The technical examination revealed both promise and profound concerns. The American M1 bazooka fired a 60mm rocket using battery-powered electrical ignition. The shaped charge warhead could penetrate approximately 75 to 100mm of armor under ideal conditions. The weapon weighed approximately 7 kilograms, light enough for a single soldier to carry and operate. The tube was simple steel, the firing mechanism was electrical rather than mechanical, and the whole system could theoretically be manufactured for a fraction of the cost of a traditional anti-tank gun. But German engineers immediately identified critical weaknesses that would need addressing before any German version could be fielded. The battery-powered ignition system posed the most serious concern. German experience on the Eastern Front had proven catastrophically that batteries failed in extreme cold. Soviet winter temperatures rendered chemical batteries virtually useless. The wooden shoulder stock of the American bazooka contained compartments for 4 D-cell batteries, two active and two spare, but moisture and freezing temperatures made them unreliable. Any German version would require a more robust ignition system, something mechanical rather than chemical, something that would work at -30 degrees Celsius on the frozen steppes of Russia. The second problem was more fundamental. German engineers recognized that the 60mm warhead was insufficient against Soviet T-34 tanks, which featured sloped armor that could defeat smaller-shaped charges. American bazookas might threaten German Panzer IIIs and early Panzer IVs, but against the heavier armor appearing on both sides of the Eastern Front, the weapon would be marginally effective at best. The Wehrmacht already possessed 88mm shaped charge warheads for the Raketenpanzerbüchse 43 Pupchen, a wheeled anti-tank rocket launcher that cost 5,730 Reichsmarks to produce and required a crew to transport. Adapting this existing ammunition to a shoulder-fired tube would provide superior penetration while utilizing established production lines. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The demonstration that sealed the decision occurred in March 1943 at Kummersdorf. German weapons officials observed captured American bazookas being test-fired alongside experimental German anti-tank weapons. The captured weapons proved the concept was sound. What American engineers had created with minimal time and resources, German engineering could make lethal. Development proceeded with remarkable efficiency. Engineers replaced the battery ignition with a magneto system activated by a spring-loaded trigger mechanism. Pulling the trigger compressed a spring that, when released, spun a small generator to create the electrical current needed for ignition. This eliminated cold weather vulnerability while maintaining reliable firing. The tube diameter increased to 88mm to accommodate existing Pupchen ammunition, providing nearly 50% greater warhead weight than the American original. The larger diameter meant more explosive, which meant deeper penetration. Initial calculations suggested the German version could penetrate 160mm of armor, more than double the American bazooka's capability. One significant design compromise emerged early. The German rocket motor continued burning for approximately 2 meters after leaving the launch tube, unlike the American rocket, which burned out inside the tube. This increased range and velocity. The rocket traveled faster and farther, but created a massive backblast that endangered the operator. Early test firings revealed the danger. The exhaust plume extended 10 to 30 meters behind the weapon, hot enough to cause severe burns and temporary blindness to anyone standing too close. This earned the weapon its nickname among troops Ofenrohr, meaning stovepipe. Operators would need protective equipment and careful positioning to avoid injuring themselves or nearby friendly troops. By July 1, 1943, just 8 months after capturing the first American bazookas, German documents officially listed the new weapon as the 8.8cm Raketenpanzerbüchse. The designation would soon change to Raketenpanzerbüchse 43, commonly shortened to RPSB-43, though soldiers would universally call it the Panzerschreck tank terror. Production preparations were already underway at multiple facilities across Germany. The transformation from captured American weapon to German mass production would take less than 11 months from first examination to first delivery. The production infrastructure mobilized with typical German industrial efficiency, though the word efficiency masks the human cost that would make the Panzerschreck one of the darkest chapters in weapons manufacturing history. 6 primary manufacturers received contracts for the new weapon: Ensinger Union in Feckheim, Hassag in Muselwitz, Gebrüder Scheffler in Berlin, Jekyll in Freital, Kronprinz in Solingen, and Scheer in Fürth. Each facility would produce components or complete weapons, with final assembly occurring at multiple locations to prevent Allied bombing from disrupting the entire program. The distributed manufacturing strategy meant that destruction of any single factory wouldn't stop Panzerschreck production entirely. September 8, 1943. A German military report stated the weapon would be sent to frontline troops for trials very soon. By September 30th, the official manual for the Raketenpanzerbüchse had been published a comprehensive guide covering operation, maintenance, and tactical employment. October 5th saw the first delivery of 1,500 weapons and 5,000 rockets to combat units. The transformation from captured American weapon to German mass production had taken less than 11 months. In the history of military reverse engineering, this timeline remains extraordinary. Modern defense contractors typically require years to analyze, adapt, and produce foreign weapon systems. Germany did it in under a year while fighting a multi-front war. The production numbers revealed the scale of German commitment. Initial orders called for 382,000 units, though material shortages and Allied bombing would reduce output. By July 1944, when production of the RPsB-54 model ceased, 289,151 units had been manufactured. An additional 25,700 improved RPsB-54-1 models were produced between December 1944 and the war's end. Manufacturing a single Panzerschreck required just 10 work hours per weapon at a cost of 70 Reichsmarks. Compare this to 5,730 Reichsmarks for the smallest traditional anti-tank gun, the 3.7 cm Pak 35-36, which was already obsolete against modern tanks. A single Panzerschreck cost less than a military rifle, but could destroy a 40-ton tank. The economic logic was brutally simple. For the price of one towed anti-tank gun, Germany could produce over 80 Panzerschrecks. Each Panzerschreck could be operated by 2 men, rather than requiring a crew of 6 or 8. The weapons were portable enough to be positioned in places where towed guns couldn't go: upper floors of buildings, dense forests, shallow trenches. From a purely military economic perspective, the Panzerschreck represented one of the most cost-effective weapons systems of World War II. From a human perspective, its production represented systematic murder on an industrial scale. The human cost of Panzerschreck production remains one of the darkest chapters in the weapons history. Hassag, Hermann Göring's favorite armaments company, became the third largest exploiter of forced labor in Nazi-controlled Europe. The company operated multiple production facilities using slave laborers from concentration camps, turning weapons manufacturing into an extension of the Holocaust itself. By October 1943, over 60,000 workers labored for Hassag. More than half were forced laborers and prisoners of war. The company operated 16,581 prisoners in labor subcamps by 1945. These weren't workers in any meaningful sense. They were human beings, worked to death. At Hassag facilities in Poland, approximately 35,000 deaths occurred across various camps, though incomplete records prevent precise accounting. The true number is almost certainly higher. Workers endured 12-hour shifts with exposure to toxic chemicals used in rocket propellant and explosive production. Brutal beatings were routine. Starvation rations were standard. Sanitation didn't exist. The Schlieben camp producing munitions, including Panzerschreck components, housed between 2,000 and 5,000 female prisoners. The average life expectancy was 2 months. 2 months. Women arrived at the camp and were dead within 60 days, their bodies consumed by forced labor, starvation, disease, and deliberate brutality. An explosion at Schlieben on October 12, 1944, killed 96 prisoner laborers. The blast occurred when unstable propellant detonated during mixing. No safety protocols existed to protect prisoner workers. Their lives were considered expendable, literally calculated into production costs as acceptable losses. The Panzerschreck that German soldiers praised as a life-saving weapon was manufactured by people whose lives meant nothing to the regime producing it. Every rocket fired, every tank destroyed, every German soldier who survived because a Panzerschreck stopped an Allied tank, all of it built on systematic murder. This context doesn't appear in most military histories of the weapon. Technical analyses focus on penetration statistics, production numbers, tactical employment. The human beings who died producing these weapons are footnotes, if they're mentioned at all. but their deaths are as much a part of the Panzerschreck's history as its 88mm warhead. The weapon's combat deployment began in autumn 1943, initially in small numbers as production ramped up. By January 1944, 21,141 Panzerschrecks had been issued to combat units, though another 39,526 remained in armories due to Wehrmacht distribution problems. German infantry units on all fronts demanded the new weapon, recognizing its effectiveness against Allied armor. Eastern Front forces received priority for Panzerschreck distribution. Soviet tank commanders quickly noticed the changing tactical situation, where German infantry had previously relied on magnetic mines, anti-tank rifles, and bundled grenades, all requiring suicidally close approaches to armor. They now possessed weapons that could engage tanks at 150 to 200 meters. Every German strongpoint potentially concealed multiple rocket launcher teams. The weapon proved particularly effective in defensive positions, which is where German forces increasingly found themselves by 1944. German tactical doctrine called for Panzerschreck teams to establish interlocking fields of fire from concealed positions. Teams would dig staggered trenches no more than 115 meters apart, ensuring attacking armor-faced rockets from multiple directions. The effective range against moving targets was approximately 100 meters, though static targets could be engaged at greater distances. This was shorter than ideal, but still far beyond the range of hand-thrown magnetic mines or satchel charges. More importantly, the Panzerschreck allowed infantry to remain in defensive positions rather than having to close with tanks. Technical performance data from German and Finnish tests demonstrated the weapon's capabilities. The RPZB GR4000 322 rocket achieved penetration of 160 millimeters of armor at 60-degree impact angle or up to 230 millimeters at optimal 90-degree perpendicular angle. The rocket velocity reached 110 meters per second compared to the American Bazooka's 85 meters per second. The warhead contained 700 grams of explosive, triple the American weapon's charge. Against a Tiger tank with 100 millimeters of frontal armor, a Panzerschreck rocket was theoretically capable of penetration if it struck at the right angle. Against a Sherman tank with 76 millimeters of frontal armor, penetration was virtually guaranteed. Against a T-34 with 45 millimeters of side armor, a single hit could be catastrophic. The blast shield addition in February 1944 created the RPZB-54 model, which became the standard production variant. This shield, a simple, curved steel plate mounted in front of the operator's face, protected soldiers from the rocket's back blast, though it increased weight from 9.25 kilograms to 11 kilograms. Operators still required protective equipment, including gloves and face protection, as the backblast danger zone extended 10 to 30 meters behind the weapon. Western Front deployment accelerated before D-Day. German forces in Normandy received thousands of Panzerschrecks, positioned to engage Allied landing craft and tanks at the waterline. The weapons proved effective in the Bocage country, the dense hedgerow terrain of Normandy, where short engagement ranges and abundant concealment suited Panzerschreck tactics perfectly. American tank crews, recognizing their own invention turned against them in improved form, developed countermeasures. Additional armor plates were welded onto Shermans. Sandbags were hung on hull sides. Infantry screens advanced ahead of tanks to suppress Panzerschreck teams before they could fire. Artillery and mortars targeted suspected firing positions preemptively. Despite these measures, the psychological impact often exceeded the physical damage. Allied tank crews knew that every hedgerow, every building, every pile of rubble might conceal a Panzerschreck team. The weapon's distinctive launch signature, a bright flash followed by a smoke trail, and the whooshing sound of the rocket motor became a dreaded sight and sound. Tank commanders reported that crew effectiveness decreased significantly in areas known to have high concentrations of Panzerschrecks. Even when rockets missed, the knowledge that German infantry could engage armor at range created hesitation and caution that slowed Allied advances. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Meanwhile, the American bazooka, the weapon that inspired the Panzerschreck, was proving itself in ways that contradicted theoretical limitations. The Sicily campaign in July 1943 saw the M1A1 bazooka, equipped with improved M6A1 rockets, achieve remarkable success against German armour. Official records document that M1A1 bazookas accounted for 4 medium German tanks and 1 heavy Tiger I. That Tiger kill remains one of the most improbable shots in anti-tank warfare history. The rocket struck the Tiger's driver vision port, a narrow opening in the frontal armour at just the right angle to penetrate through the gap and into the crew compartment. The vision port was protected by thick bulletproof glass and armoured shutters, but the shaped charge jet from the bazooka warhead found the seam between armour plates. It was a 1 in 1,000 shot, the kind of thing that shouldn't work but did. The Tiger was abandoned by its crew, later examined by American and British intelligence officers, who couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. A 2.36-inch diameter rocket had mission-killed a 57-ton tank that was supposed to be invulnerable to anything except dedicated anti-tank guns and other tanks. The Americans hadn't even known it was possible. This revelation created cognitive dissonance in both American and German armour doctrine. If a bazooka could kill a Tiger even through a lucky shot, then no tank was truly safe from infantry. The psychological calculus of armoured warfare had shifted. Tank crews could no longer assume they were untouchable against foot soldiers. Infantry no longer had to run from tanks, but American ordnance officers also recognized the Sicily Tiger kill for what it was: an improbable exception that proved the rule. The M1A1 bazooka, with its M6A1 rocket, could penetrate 3 to 4 inches of armour under ideal conditions. Against side or rear armour of most German tanks, this was sufficient. Against frontal armour of Panthers and Tigers, it was inadequate. The improved M9 bazooka, introduced in late 1943, incorporated magneto-ignition similar to the Panzerschreck, eliminating the battery problems that plagued earlier versions. The M6A3 rocket, with its blunt nose and improved shaped charge design, could penetrate up to 4 inches of armour 100 millimeters, making it marginally more effective. But marginally more effective wasn't enough. German tanks were getting heavier. The Panther, entering service in mid-1943, featured 80 millimeters of frontal armour, sloped at 55 degrees, creating effective thickness of 140 millimeters. The Tiger II, appearing in early 1944, had 150 millimeters of frontal armour sloped at 50 degrees, effectively impenetrable to American bazookas. American tank crews in Normandy reported firing 30 or more rounds from their 75mm guns at Tigers at close range and watching shells bounce off harmlessly. If dedicated tank guns couldn't penetrate Tigers frontally, what chance did a 2.36-inch handheld rocket have? The answer, American soldiers learned through bitter experience, was to not engage Tigers frontally at all. Bazooka teams developed tactics focused on ambush and maneuver. Wait for the tank to pass, engage from the side or rear, target the tracks to immobilize the vehicle, then follow up with shots against thinner armor. Use terrain and buildings for concealment. Never fire from the same position twice. These tactics worked, but they required courage bordering on recklessness. Bazooka teams had to let tanks get close 50 yards or less before firing. The back blast gave away their position immediately. German tank crews would hose down suspected firing positions with machine gun fire. Casualties among bazooka teams were extraordinarily high. Assignment to bazooka duty was often considered Medal of Honor work, not because it earned medals, but because it was nearly suicidal. Many platoons rotated bazooka duty among squad members because no one could be expected to survive it for long. Yet the weapon remained popular with infantry. Despite its limitations, despite the danger, the bazooka gave foot soldiers a chance against armor. It wasn't a guaranteed kill. It wasn't safe. But it was better than nothing, which is what infantry had possessed before. From the German perspective, examining captured American bazookas in 1942 and 43 revealed something deeper than just weapon specifications. It showed them what American military philosophy valued: simplicity over sophistication, mass production over artisanal quality, good enough over perfect. German weapons development traditionally emphasized technical excellence. The MP-40 submachine gun, the MG-42 machine gun, the Panther tank, these were sophisticated machines built to exacting standards. They were expensive. They required skilled labor. They took time to manufacture. But they were very good at what they did. The American bazooka was none of these things. It was a steel tube with basic sights and a simple electrical trigger. It could be manufactured in any machine shop, with basic metalworking equipment. It required minimal training to operate. It was, by German standards, crude. And yet, it worked. That was the revelation. You didn't need a perfectly machined, precision-engineered weapon to kill tanks. You needed something that was good enough, cheap enough, and simple enough to be issued to every infantry squad. American industrial philosophy prioritized quantity and deployability over individual weapon quality. The Germans took this lesson and tried to improve upon it. The Panzerschreck used the American bazooka's basic concept, but increased the warhead size, changed the ignition system, and improved the sights. It was more powerful than the American original. It was also heavier, more expensive, and more complicated to manufacture. In trying to perfect the American concept, Germany partially missed the point. The bazooka's genius wasn't in its specifications, it was in its accessibility. By making the Panzerschreck bigger and better, Germany created a weapon that fewer troops could carry and use effectively. This tension between quality and quantity characterized much of German weapons development during the war. The Panzerfaust, a simpler, single-use anti-tank weapon, would eventually prove more practical than the reusable Panzerschreck precisely because it embraced disposability. Use it once and throw it away. No need to carry a heavy launcher. No need to worry about backblast safety. Just point it at a tank and pull the trigger. The Panzerfaust would eventually be produced in millions, far more than the Panzerschreck, because it was simpler and cheaper. It was, in many ways, closer to the American bazooka's original philosophy than the Panzerschreck ever was. Allied forces developed increasingly sophisticated responses to German Panzerschreck threats as the war progressed. Tank crews learned to identify likely ambush positions. Infantry tactics emphasized clearing buildings and terrain before armor advanced. Artillery would prep suspected Panzerschreck positions with saturation fire. Spaced, armor became common on Allied tanks by late 1944. The principle was simple: mount additional steel plates or mesh screening several inches away from the tank's main armor. When a shaped charge hit the spaced armor, it would detonate at the wrong distance from the main armor plate, dissipating the jet's effectiveness before it could penetrate. German forces had actually pioneered this technique themselves, with Schürzen armored skirts mounted on Panzer IVs and other tanks to defeat Soviet anti-tank rifles. By 1944, both sides were using spaced armor specifically to counter shaped charge weapons. The Americans also began developing their own improved bazookas. The M20 Super Bazooka, developed late in the war but not fielded until 1948, increased caliber to 3.5 inches, 89 millimeters, very close to the German Panzerschreck's 88 millimeters. This wasn't coincidence. American ordnance officers had examined captured Panzerschrecks and recognized that the Germans had been right about larger warhead diameter. The M20 could penetrate 11 inches of armor 280 millimeters, making it effective against any tank of the World War II era. It arrived too late for the European war, but would prove its worth in Korea against T-34 tanks. The irony was complete. America invented the shoulder-fired anti-tank rocket launcher. Germany captured American bazookas, improved them, and fielded superior versions. America then captured German Panzerschrecks, learned from them, and created even better versions. Each side was teaching the other through battlefield captures and reverse engineering. The Panzerschreck program ultimately demonstrates rapid military adaptation under extreme pressure. From initial capture of American bazookas in November 1942 to mass production by September 1943, Germany transformed a foreign concept into indigenous capability in less than a year. The program succeeded through pragmatic engineering that adapted existing resources rather than developing entirely new technology. German engineers didn't start from scratch. They took the American tube launcher concept, married it to existing 88mm shaped charge ammunition, and created a hybrid that exceeded both parent systems. Germany's ability to produce nearly 300,000 Panzerschrecks while fighting a multi-front war reveals remarkable industrial resilience, though that resilience was built on slave labor and systematic exploitation. The weapon emerged from systematic reverse engineering that identified and corrected original design weaknesses. But calling this simply reverse engineering misses something important. The Germans didn't copy the bazooka, they evolved it. They created a substantially improved weapon system that exceeded the original in every measurable performance criterion except weight and manufacturing simplicity. Modern military historians study the Panzerschreck as a case study in successful technology transfer under combat conditions, rapid product development under wartime constraints, and industrial mobilization during resource scarcity. The timeline from capture to mass production remains impressive, even by modern standards. Few weapons programs have achieved similar speed from concept to deployment, particularly when starting from captured enemy equipment. Even with modern computer-aided design, advanced manufacturing techniques, and peacetime conditions, contemporary defense contractors typically require years to bring new weapons from concept to production. Germany did it in under a year while fighting the Soviet Union, defending North Africa, preparing for Allied invasion of Italy, and bombing Allied cities. The organizational and industrial achievement cannot be separated from the human cost that made it possible. Returning to that question posed at the beginning, could a 2.36-inch bazooka really destroy a Tiger tank? The historical record provides nuanced answers. Theoretically, no. The M1 and M1A1 bazookas, with their 3 to 4 inches of penetration capability, should not be able to defeat a Tiger's frontal armor. The numbers don't work. 100 millimeters of armor should stop 100 millimeters of penetration. Practically, yes, under specific conditions. The Sicily Tiger kill demonstrated that vulnerability points existed even on the heaviest tanks. Vision ports, hatches, turret rings, track assemblies, engine compartments all presented opportunities for skilled or lucky bazooka teams. Side and rear armor was substantially thinner. Tigers featured 60 millimeters of side hull armor and 80 millimeters of side turret armor within the bazooka's penetration capability at close range with perpendicular hits. Rear armor was even thinner. Psychologically? Absolutely. The mere existence of man-portable anti-tank weapons changed how tank crews operated. Even if bazookas couldn't reliably kill Tigers frontally, they could damage them, disable them, or force them to withdraw. More importantly, they made tank crews cautious. A Tiger tank that stayed buttoned up, that avoided close-range engagements with infantry, that retreated when threatened by Panzerschreck or bazooka teams, that Tiger was removed from the battle as effectively as if it had been destroyed. Mission kill versus actual kill is a distinction that matters more in after-action reports than in battlefield outcomes. The proliferation of man-portable anti-tank weapons fundamentally altered infantry armor dynamics. Before bazookas and Panzerschrecks, infantry caught in the open by tanks were doomed. After these weapons became common, tanks caught in close terrain without infantry support were vulnerable. This shift wouldn't fully manifest until later wars, Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. But the seeds were planted in World War II. The Panzerschreck and bazooka represented the first generation of weapons that would eventually evolve into modern anti-tank guided missiles like the Javelin and NLAW. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.